Labour's very own budget-friendly Tory, who decided the real crisis in mental health isn't underfunding, or overwork or the grinding of brutality, of life under capitalism and a cost of living crisis. No, it's overdiagnosis, according to him. Here's what he said. Here's the other thing: mental well-being illness is a spectrum, and I think definitely there's an overdiagnosis, but there's too many people being written off. And to your point about treatment, too many people who just aren't getting the support they need. So if you can get that support to people much earlier, then you can help people to either stay in work or get back to work. That's right, written off like a car. According to Wesley, too many people are being told they have mental health conditions. Now, I don't know about you, but this sounds an awful lot like the government literally trying to gaslight an entire population into thinking that their suffering is all imaginary. You're not depressed, you just need to have a better attitude. You're not anxious, you just need to work harder. Um, but let's get serious for a minute, because this is not just nonsense, it's absolutely dangerous. The stats kind of speak for themselves. There's 1 in 4 people in the UK who experience a mental health problem each year. NHS waiting lists are absolutely insane at the moment. They've risen by 29% over the last 2 years. And we have 1.8 million people who are currently waiting for support. Suicide rates have unfortunately been creeping up, with 5,500 deaths recorded in 2022 alone. And Streeting's big concern is overdiagnosis. Maybe try address the underfunding. Novel, are we witnessing a deliberate effort to pathologize mental illness as a personal failing rather than a structural issue linked to poverty, insecure work, and housing instability in order to justify underfunding and cuts? And shouldn't the conversation kind of be around fixing those material conditions?
Yeah, well, it's almost like pointing to this conversation, telling us we're all crazy, we're all, we're completely off it, we'd have no clue what we're talking about, and actually we're completely overreacting to our material conditions, right? The framing of an overdiagnosis is not just a lie, but it's intentional blaming directed at the whole population. And as you say, it's a gaslight tactic. Wes Streeting is acting like a obsessive ex-boyfriend, blaming you for everything, rather than rather than admitting it's completely his mistake.
Yeah, so true.
He's all you have to do is really follow the money. And private equity and private healthcare invested in Streeting, and they're looking to make a return. And so this deranged sort of run that Streeting is going on is a complete reflection of what the Labour Party has taken a hold of now. Its whole NEC is for the hedge fund bankers. His campaign was backed by private healthcare, and it should be no surprise to any of us that Labour basically don't want to fix the issues that we have. They want to be in power and they don't want to govern. The thing I'm personally confused by, and maybe you can elaborate on this too, is it's the same exact thing we said about the Conservatives, which is they get into power, they don't want to govern. So I don't know why we're not characterizing Labour as the same now. Will it take Streeting to wear a George Osborne mask in Parliament before we start saying he's like an austerity minister? It's something I'm really concerned about, and it'll be far too late before people start to collectively realize that they're no different.
Yeah, and I think people are realizing it already. It seems that the Labour Party is cosplaying the Tories, and it's something that Curtis said the other day, and I was like, oh my god, that's such a good point. That Labour didn't win, the Conservatives just lost. Because if you actually compare the stats or how many people voted for Labour, it really wasn't that great in comparison to Corbyn. So it's like, actually, Labour aren't even the popular party, to be honest. They're just the party that was there because people were sick and tired of 14 years of Tory rule. But this reactionary rhetoric that I'm seeing from Streeting is obviously something that we see with the Tories and we see with the right quite significantly. But it definitely is a thinly veiled attack on those who are struggling. Like, the notion of mental health isn't a serious public concern. It's just something that you need to kind of just like get over. And it does play into, it fits very, very neatly into the neoliberal playbook, where structural crises, underfunded healthcare, rising poverty, the mental toil of precarity, and how hard it is to get certain resources are reframed as an individual failing, like it's your fault this has happened, or in this case the problem is too many of you are being recognized as needing help. Well, of course, people need help. You've literally driven them into the ground. People are struggling to pay rent. People are struggling to buy a
Exactly.
property. People are, are are literally glorifying hustle culture, 2, 3 jobs, and it's
Mhm.
disgusting. But then on top of that, people can't even don't have the capacity to go and get another job because it's difficult. That this society is actually yeah, I feel like neoliberalism is just taking a stronghold of all the
Yeah.
rhetoric and all the policies currently in Britain.
No, I 100% agree, and it's the sort of individualism that was birthed out of Thatcher's policies, right?
Yeah.
Where it was destruction of council homes, it was destruction of trade unions, selling off of manufacturers, sorry, things that we manufactured within the UK, and those were really socialist understanding of the world around you, right? Which was based on collective class consciousness, being able to operate within a workplace where you felt a bit more equal, where you were actually producing something for your nation, or at the very least in a trade union, you felt like you had some sort of bargaining power. And obviously, because neoliberalism destroyed all of that, what we're back at is the circular sort of rhetoric that probably we've heard for 100 plus years before we were all born, which is workers, you're not working hard enough.
Yeah.
You're completely not working hard enough. And I think it was really good that you brought up, especially the statistics, because even us joking aside, it will have a real impact, right?
Mm.
Um, this sort of dangerous rhetoric that Streeting is playing about with, it's going to make people force. It's going to force people to look at themselves rather than the material conditions. They're not going to talk about their issues, not only because there's no one to talk about, in terms of the NHS, but simply they'll feel like that they're not working that second or third job, like you've mentioned. And I think this sort of austerity manifesto and these ideas perpetuated is the cost of running capitalism. You're literally losing lives to run capitalism. And it's like Marx says, you will just at the very least be given sustenance to live. And
Yeah.
everything on top of that, doesn't matter if your living standards drop, it doesn't matter if your life expectancy drops, as long as you have children, it's all okay. This is the real cost of running a economic doctrine that is not beneficial to any of us and was never set up for any of us.
Yeah, it's such a great point because actually it's not just dangerous, it's actually ideological, isn't it? Like the notion of him even trying to assert that it's overdiagnosis aligns very, very closely with right-wing narratives that seek to delegitimize mental illness as though it's not a disability. I think people are still attached to the notion that disabilities are visible. And I think times have moved on. Like disabilities
Yeah.
have not always been visible. We are dealing with very, very different issues. But it does go back to Thatcher. Deindustrialization, privatization, and underinvestment were all things that were happening during that era and are continuing to happen now. My worry and my biggest fear is that if they continue to portray mental illness as this fad, as this, a product of the weak-minded, or that it's a burden to the state, that might set the stage for the government to justify further cuts to mental health services or more restrictions when it comes to access to therapy and medication. And then on top of that, an overall rollback of rights for disabled people and even those who are like neurodivergent too. It's a
Yeah.
spectrum, isn't it? I mean, I'm not trying to echo Wes Streeting, but it is a spectrum. So
Yeah.
my worry is that further cuts will happen. And I think we're kind of seeing the moment with these threats when it comes to, we're going to cut PIP and be careful if you're on PIP and rah, rah, rah. Like, it's terrible. So, it's not just about mental health, but maybe this is more about, I mean, they said we're going to get, they got rid of NHS England and those are their plans. But what if they seek to privatize the NHS more? And that if these mental health conditions are overdiagnosed, and the next logical step for a politician, for a government, is to argue that the NHS is wasting resources, and that the private sector efficiency is needed, and all this
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of stuff. That's my worry, that the corporations should take over more healthcare provision.
Yeah, I think it's completely valid fear to have, especially like I said, Streeting didn't get funded out of nowhere by private healthcare. They want an investment. That's why you give money to politicians, right? So he can talk all he wants about bloat and inefficiency, but we never talk about bloat and inefficiency when it comes to private contractors. It's never
Yeah.
mentioned. The austerity and the cuts always have to come at something that's genuinely quite efficient. Either it's genuinely decent managers, or it's people like you've said that are just completely reliant on the state for a good reason because they've been seen by a doctor and they're disabled. That's not bloat. You can frame it as such, But the reality is that the private contractors, which we'd be giving tens of millions of pounds for basically not good standards, is the real issue. We take a look at PFI in Blair's late years, for example. We're not close to paying off the debt for that for another, I think, 2 decades. And so we need to. I think Grace Blakely said it really well in her book, which is Vulture Capitalism. But she said that public services, when they get privatized, they're on a death loop, essentially. No one thinks about anything long term. We rack up more and more and more debt, and we don't actually fund things for efficiency, but just for the sake of, hey, we're paying enough money into it. Here's some inefficient things that we're going to try and do, which is cutting out real essential services, which, for example, may be freezing PIP or making it hard to qualify for PIP. And what you're left with is just the grounds running for a far more radical government next election.
Exactly. It feels like it's just going to get worse from here. Like, if the government actually admits there's a mental health crisis, then they might actually have to fund services.
They might have to do their job.
Yeah, they might have to do their job, or actually we have to put money into the system that we took things out of, or regulate these exploitative working conditions that people are working within, or address the years and years of austerity that have led to this. But I think what Wes Streeting is trying to do, if they try to convince, the masses that they're just imagining their suffering, then problem solved. And it's kind of the same playbook we've seen. I think we've been speaking on this when it comes to welfare cuts and the rise in homelessness, and even long COVID. So the state manufactures suffering, then tells you it's all in your head. And I think it's insane. And I think you kind of answered this actually as well, because you were touching on capitalism and the impacts that it's having on all of us. But do you think we're witnessing a broader trend of the government essentially gaslighting people into thinking that their suffering isn't real to justify dismantling the welfare state?
Well, Sarah, you might want to stop there, otherwise you'll probably be verbatim quoting Marx. Essentially, it's a bad day. It's a bad day when someone's looking at the news and in the back of your head you're thinking about something that Marx wrote, and you're like, "Yep, the guy was right." That's not something you actually want to happen. But no, it's completely true. I mean, like verbatim what you said, it's false class consciousness. It's this idea that we're handed down through the way we work and in the conditions that we work, that it's in actuality our faults, not our material condition around us, but instead we have to try and live up and go line in line with what our managers are saying, with what CEOs of companies are saying, with what the shareholders are saying for extra profit. It causes you to look at the world, not materially, not of something based in reality, not the idea that your pay is low and your rent is high, but instead it forces you to look at the idea, which is, I have no clue what's going on. I have no clue how things are working. All I know is that I'm not working hard enough. And my friend over there has got about 3 jobs. That's probably what I'm going to have to do next year if my rent keeps going up.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.